Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Buck Stops Here. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we've certainly seen the impact that the Russia-Ukraine crisis has had on the energy markets and also, of course, the commodity markets. Also, part of that, of course, is what we're seeing in terms of food inflation. To unpack what's going on and what we can expect to see perhaps over the 6 to 12 months out, we have Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. He is the Senior Director, Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University. Sylvain, great to see you and get caught up with you. I've been reading your reports. It's really interesting to take a look at what's going on in the world today. So thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Catherine.
Thank you. I always get nervous of it to quote somebody, so correct me if I'm wrong. But one of your reports talks about the fact that the pandemic is really just a bit of a dress rehearsal in terms of what we're going to see as it relates to a food crisis. Unpack what you mean by that.
Well, back in March of 2020, a lot of Canadians saw empty shelves, and of course, at the time, as a food distribution specialist, I knew that we weren't really looking at a food shortage, but it was more about supply chain disruptions, and frankly, the just-in-time model was under a lot of pressure. We couldn't store merchandising; just couldn't happen. It was, that closing one sector of the economy, which was food service, all that business, $90 billion worth of business, went from one sector to another. Retail had to absorb all of that. So I knew that really it was more about reshifting things, more so than shortages per se. And it was quite easy at the time to reassure the public in terms of, no, we're not running out of food. It's just the food is not getting to shelves as quickly as it did before. But now we're looking at a really, really critical situation right now around the world, because there's a bit of a perfect storm going on with climate, labor, the COVID hangover affecting supply chains, and of course Ukraine. So all of these components are making our access to food way more challenging now than just 2 years ago, when we just saw empty shelves. Now we're likely going to see some empty shelves. We're still going to be okay in terms of feeding Canada per se, but we're probably going to have fewer options. And frankly, I'm expecting some rationing to happen over the next little while.
Rationing?
Yeah.
Not in Canada.
No, absolutely. In Canada. So one product I can give you as an example is vegetable oil. And why I use this as an example is that vegetable oil is in everything we buy at the store. Really, it's not just about frying in food service or at home, but vegetable oil is in everything we buy: palm oil, soybean oil, canola oil. All of these commodities have been impacted by either climate, labor, and now we're seeing governments getting nervous, like Indonesia just decided to ban exports of palm oil, and that's the number one exporter of palm oil. And palm oil is the cheapest vegetable oil we have in the world. And so what's going on right now is that more and more inventories are tightening everywhere. And I am expecting in Canada over the next few months to see grocers put on a sign, say you're only allowed to buy 1 or 2 bottles per visit, just basically to make sure that everyone actually has enough to buy.
And that's Canada. We're going to talk more about that. But I think when people are seeing some of the commodity pressures and food price inflation, all eyes really are turning to Russia and Ukraine, and really that area, or Ukraine being the main provider to Europe from a breadbasket perspective. And so I think most people are thinking that the problem's over there, but you're saying it's really global.
Oh, absolutely. Everything is intertwined, and frankly, I would go even further, Catherine. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, the Middle East, and Northeast Africa, really.
Yeah.
And that's where we're expecting to see over 100 million more people suffer from hunger or could experience famine as well. The World Bank actually stated that exact data about 2 weeks ago, and I actually agree with the World Bank. I think some regions are going to be looking at empty shelves, or access to food is going to be a problem. In Canada,
Wait, we're going to pick it up right after the break. So Sylvain, it's amazing to look at the numbers and think about that. We're talking about famine. You were about to talk about how that relates to Canada.
Absolutely. So in Canada, again, we shouldn't panic. I don't think food access is going to be an issue, but food affordability will. And we're seeing, with numbers coming out of the U.S. I'm in the U.S. right now. The food inflation rate is now at 9.4%, and historically, Canada has always caught up to the Americans. So we're likely going to see a food inflation rate reach perhaps even 9% over the next little while. And I would say that food inflation, when it's not under control, it's a bit of a disease. And what I mean by that, consumers will walk into the store and knowing that that bottle of vegetable oil will get more expensive, they'll hoard, they'll actually buy as much as possible. And that's the danger here. And the more we see people do that, the more it will put pressure on food systems. So we're really at the crossroads here, and that's why a lot of people are nervous. So on the one side, you may actually see consumers putting more pressure. On the other hand, you may see governments like Indonesia implementing protectionist measures just to make sure they can feed their own.
Um, when we think about the food inflation that we're witnessing right now, how are you seeing consumers actually respond?
Well, so it's they're frugal. They're trading down, and that's why there's more focus on private labels. I was actually just in Toronto this week at a show, and we did talk about the new consumer coming out of the pandemic, and there's a lot of cash in the system, but there's a lot of plastic too, and so people are starting to really look at their budget and see, okay, with this inflation, what am I supposed to do here? So they're revisiting their food shopping habits. They're looking at different stores. They're looking at options to save, coupons, flyers, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they are trading down essentially. And for grocers in particular, we're seeing more conversions. So discounting stores are becoming more popular, and you're seeing it from Loblaws, you're seeing it from Sobeys, you're seeing it from Metro as well. Discounting is king, and that's going to last for a little while.
You also bring up an interesting point in terms of who influences ag around the world, and describe to us a little bit about the relationship between Russia and China and what we need to be thinking about as relates to how they might impact our food source, our food supply, and the costs. I think it's longer term, but I don't know if it's 6 to 12 months. But how do you see that relationship evolving?
Yeah, that's the wild card. Nobody really knows what China wants to do or will do, really. China, from an ag perspective, has grown as an economy. Really, it produces a lot of commodities, but it also buys a lot of commodities, and it buys not only for China but for the rest of the world. And so, Russia, with all the sanctions against the country, China could actually buy some commodities and resell, or who knows. But right now, the world is desperate for more commodities. We're going to be in a deficit for wheat, barley, corn, sunflower, everything really. And so, what Russia decides to do, or what China decides to do, is going to actually have a huge impact on prices. It's going to have a huge impact on access. We just saw this week the EU is just desperately trying to get grains out of Ukraine as much as possible, because logistically, because of the Black Sea, because of what's going on with the Black Sea, it's been very difficult to actually get products out of Ukraine, including fertilizers. So the EU is trying its best to put less pressure on prices, but it's going to be tough until we know exactly what China wants to do. It's everyone's guess, really, what's going to happen.
Of course, fertilizers are a key component to our food supply and our food costs. I want to pick it up after the break in terms of understanding what is actually going on with the fertilizer prices, because I think that they're surpassing grain prices. And where does that leave farmers and the ag business and incentives? We'll be right back after the short break. Sylvain, I do want to get your take in terms of what's going on with fertilizer prices, but I think for anybody listening and watching, and just hearing what you said in terms of, the deficits that we're going to be seeing on the commodity front for quite some time, can we just step back and say and really understand? I mean, you've given us some of the driving factors of that, but why is this all happening now? In addition to what we know about Ukraine and Russia, what else is going on?
Well, there's, first of all, last year, North America was hard hit by a drought. Germany was actually hit by flooding, and Russia also was hit by a drought. So it's last year wasn't great. So we're starting 2022 with very low inventories. So we were expecting 2022 to be a better year, but so far it hasn't really. So because of the conflict, but also in Canada in particular, moisture is just not at the right level. There's more moisture than last year, but there's not enough. And like canola, for example, needs a lot of moisture. So it's not looking great for this year. And in South America, they're a big producer of soybeans with Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. They're going through droughts as well, which is why, again, we're expecting expectations are very low at this point. But to grow all these crops, you need fertilizers.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the entire world is talking about this obscure part of agriculture, which is using fertilizer. And I'm happy that people are starting to look into that particular industry much more seriously.
So describe that then a little bit further in terms of what's going on with the fertilizer industry and how that industry operates, which is also quite interesting.
Yeah, so you kind of have two major hubs in the world. So you have North America and you have Europe and Asia, and of course that centerpiece is really the Ukraine and Belarus. So there's a lot of fertilizers that are sold there, and there's also China as well that does process a lot of fertilizers, and they do ship to the rest of the world, including Canada, by the way. So Canadian farmers will buy fertilizers from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and China. On the other hand, in Canada, we have Nutrien and Mosaic. Those two companies are major players, and they use a company called Canpotex, which is based out of Saskatchewan, to sell fertilizers to the rest of the world. But Catherine, to be honest, when you look at the fertilizer ecosystem, everything is set up to supply manage stocks to inflate prices as much as possible. So if there's demand, in other words, if farmers want to make more money and increase yields, prices will rise. And if there's no demand, in other words, if farmers are not making as much money, then prices drop. They close mines, and so it's a very supply managed sort of system, which really inflates prices. And Canada is actually part of that system.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we need more fertilizers, but fertilizers is 5 times more expensive now than last year.
How so? Why? Because of the system or because of the cost to produce?
Commodity prices are way high. Farmers are motivated to plant and make more and produce more. And the best way to do that is to use fertilizers. So demand is strong, and they're charging farmers for it. In fact, in Canada, farmers are paying a tariff. They buy from Russia. They buy fertilizers from Russia. They have to pay a 35% tariff on that fertilizer, which is why
Hmm.
I'm a little bit pessimistic in terms of output right now because of the penalties, because of the fact that fertilizer prices are just out of reach for many farmers.
Would you see any type of government intervention here in Canada in terms of where the fertilizer companies in Canada are allowed to sell?
It's a long-term problem. I don't think can be fixed this year. What can be fixed, of course, are things like tariffs that farmers have to pay. There are extra fees. There are surcharges right now. Farmers are actually buying fertilizers without knowing what the price is going to be. That's how desperate they are.
Hmm.
Biden, the White House is doing something, but unfortunately, in Canada, we haven't seen anything.
What's Biden doing?
There's a $500 million package going through Congress right now to help farmers grow more of the grains we need right now.
That sounds
Yeah,
very substantial.
yeah, absolutely. But in Ottawa, it's crickets.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So now you just mentioned that that in the United States, President Biden is trying to help the farmers by putting through a $500 million package to help the farmers, but crickets in
Yeah.
Ottawa, whether it's Canada or the United States, like stepping back. Well, all right, let's focus on Canada. What do you think our government can and should be doing to help the farmers and food inflation? To be clear.
Well, for farmers, it's about cash flow. So input costs are going up. And so we've been talking about fertilizers, but diesel is also an issue as well, as you know. And so in the United States right now, the Biden administration is trying to figure out ways to decrease the cost of inputs essentially, and through. So how can we get rid of tariffs, surcharges? Imposing more discipline on the fertilizer industry, essentially. That's the big one that we're seeing in the U.S. right now. With oil and diesel, they're looking at reducing taxations. In Canada, of course, the carbon tax is a problem. The budget that we saw coming out of Ottawa a few weeks ago was very much about making our agriculture greener, which and of course there's nothing wrong with that, but in 2022 right now we absolutely need a more efficient agriculture. And so anything you can do to empower farmers to grow more, increase yields, would be essential at this point. But now we're well in the middle of May, and I think we've missed a window of opportunity about a month ago to implement some of these changes, because right now most contracts are signed and farmers are actually buying fertilizers just without knowing what the price is going to be. So there's lots of risks being taken by farmers right now.
So when we think about, the viewer watching, we've talked about, the vegetable oils, soybean oils, et cetera, and grains, but walk us through how we should be thinking about maybe the next 6 to 12 months in terms of the food price inflation for, our meat, our vegetables, et cetera, et cetera.
So right now, what we're seeing are grain-based products like bakery, for example, being impacted by what's going on with the grain market. That was expected, but we are expecting later this year to see animal-based products like meat, for example, being impacted by what's happening. Frankly, the Ukrainian conflict has launch a new inflation cycle in Canada, essentially. It's the same in the US. And when you look at the current cycle, we're probably at the end of the first period. If you were to use a hockey game as an analogy, we still have a long way to go. And I know that in the US, a lot of economists are saying that that inflation has plateaued. That may be the case for inflation in general, but for food inflation in particular, I think it's going to continue to go up for a while.
Fascinating. Well, I'm glad you used hockey and not baseball analogy.
that's
Shorter
that's
amount of time.
shorter amount of time.
Having been on Wall Street, right? There's not a lot of females around, and it was always everything was a sports analogy. So,
Yeah, everyone's a sports analogy, exactly, and frankly, it's not great. Yeah, we still have a long way to go. Yeah.
we only have a few seconds left, but it's interesting as well. You point out that I think more and more people are actually gardening.
Yes, absolutely. So the gardening rate in Canada was at 51%. It's going to move up to 52, but 8% of the Canadian population is thinking of starting a garden this year, which is really interesting. I think it's more about empowerment and growing your own. And the other thing that has come up in some of our numbers is that people actually think that when you grow your products, it's of better quality. There is a thing called shelflation. Because of supply chain problems, a lot of products end up at the grocery store not being as fresh as they used to. And so people want to garden, they want to do different things to actually give them products that are fresh and are of higher quality.
Yeah, I tried last year. I had
Really?
minimal success. I could grow kale.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Kale. That was about it. So Van, great to be with you today. Thank you so much for all of your insight and knowledge and sharing it with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. See you soon.
Bye-bye.